Hello, Imi here, and I'm back over here with another X4 Foundations video. Today I provide an idea of each missile's effectiveness against small to medium ships when fired from missile turrets on destroyers supported by a few tests. Before I start, I want to mention that at this point I don't have much experience with the new fly model. I'd like to hear from you in the comments what topics need to revisit or what common problems beginners are currently facing that need more coverage. Now let's start with our test, where we will discover how well every missile type performs against a group of different xenon ships. In the most common game scenario, we're facing different types of medium and small vessels at once. Accordingly, for my test, I used the sheet menu to spawn 7 M's and N's and 3 B's and 3 BE's. This gave me a good mix of ships to test the effectiveness of the different missile types. Missiles are distinguished between dumbfire and tracking missiles. Therefore, I needed 2 different Interceptor destroyers for my test, one equipped with Argon dumbfire missile turrets and the other one with tracking missile turrets. Between each test series, I used the sheet menu to load the missile turrets with a different missile type. Only after the missiles were loaded, I armed the missile turrets to ensure no shot was fired before everything was ready for my observations. I tested each missile 3 times in both high and low attention mode, unless a missile performance was completely underwhelming. If a missile took too long to show any results, I reserved the right to stop the test, since I don't think anyone is interested in using a missile that isn't appropriate for destroying small to medium xenon ships. I also wanted to respect my own time and not waste it on tests where nothing was happening. As a comparison parameter, I used the number of missiles fired until all xenon ships were destroyed, or how many were left. Of course, missiles still have different fire rates, which could lead to faster kill speeds, but in the same turn must use more missiles to destroy all targets. However, I never trust time as a measurement parameter in X4, because I'm not sure if the game always runs at the same speed. That's why I used the number of missiles used as my measurement parameter. To be honest, the more often we need to rearm a destroyer, the more annoying and time-consuming it is. So a higher fire rate that uses more missiles is ultimately a time loss, I guess. So let's dive into my test results now and start with dumbfire missiles first. First, I go over each dumbfire missile in high attention mode. Afterward, I go over them all at once in low attention mode, because they can be summarized in one conclusion. When we look at a heavy cluster missile, we see that it has a very slow fire rate. From time to time, we observe barrages of 3 missiles, but they are very slow and we can only guess what their target is due to their very slow fly speed of 36 meters per second. Their very slow fire rate might also correlate with their insanely short NPC targeting range of 3.5 kilometers, which is shorter than the firing range of both Xenon S and M impulse projectors. This means they only get a few chances to shoot if they are outranged most of the time. The light cluster missile, on the other hand, seems a bit more enthusiastic about firing, which is likely due to its increased NPC targeting range of 5.5 kilometers. But as we will see later, the fire rate is still a bit suboptimal. Its fly speed is also improved to 165 meters per second, which, along with the slow fire rate, is still too slow to effectively fight small vessels. During my test, where the Odysseus-E lost almost its entire shield and 1 large dumbfire missile turret, not a single enemy craft was destroyed, and only around 140 missiles were fired. The heavy dumbfire missiles 1 and 2 have a further increased NPC targeting range to 9 and 10 kilometers respectively. I assume this leads to their increased fire rate compared to both cluster missiles. Although their fly speed with 233 and 259 meters per second is improved. These improvements lead to increased effectiveness, but still, after around 1,300 missiles were left in the ammunition depot, I cancelled both tests. Even though I only ran 1 test with these missiles, I would say that the MK2 dumbfire missile type is slightly more destructive due to its improved characteristics. However, I still conclude that their accuracy is too low because of their slow fly speed and lack of ability to track enemy vessels. Their light counterpart is the first missile type where things get spicy. These have a clearly improved fly speed of around 1,100 meters per second. Their NPC targeting ranges are 7 kilometers and 8 kilometers for the MK1 and MK2 respectively. These types unleash a constant missile barrage upon their targets, which leads to an average destruction of each xenon ship after using only 1,309 and 1,993 light Dumbfire missiles for the MK1 and MK2 respectively. This is far from effective, but still way better than the others. The last Dumbfire missile type for the high attention mode we have is the heavy scatter missile. This can be summarized in one word: shotgun. These missiles are shot in a cone and disperse over their fly range. The shooting pattern, along with their comparable fly speed to the light Dumbfire missiles, seems to make them the most effective Dumbfire type in high attention mode, with 605 missiles used on average to clean up the Xenon fleet. Because the heavy scatter missile has an NPC targeting range of only 3.5 kilometers, it makes me wonder why its fire rate is so much higher than that one of the cluster missile. This can be broken down to the reload time, which I didn't have in mind when I looked at the cluster missiles. The heavy cluster missiles have a reload time of 45 seconds. The light one has 50 seconds, and the heavy scatter missiles have a reload time of 4 seconds. According to this, I would render the fire rate of a missile not to their targeting range in a missile destroyer with a small to medium ship scenario, but to their reload time. All Dumbfire missiles in low attention mode can be summarized as ineffective. Sometimes I let the test run while doing other things, and after 7 minutes they often showed no result, while only half of the stock missiles were fired. In the extreme case of the heavy cluster missile, not a single shot was even taken. After the test, I realized it could be possible that I didn't wait long enough, since with a 45-second reload time, the guns weren't even loaded before I abandoned the test. With the Dumbfire missile types covered, we now moving on to the different tracking missiles. The testing strategy for the tracking missiles stayed the same. First, I will cover all missiles except the EMP because of its non-existing damage in high attention mode, and will look at the heavy and light counterparts of each type to conclude why the light or heavy performs better. For the low attention mode analysis, I will summarize the effectiveness of all missiles again. This time we can categorize them into 2 or 3 effectiveness classes. So let's delve into each tracking missile and start with the heavy guided missile. Heavy guided missiles have the same problem as every other missile. They are slow but have a long maximum flight time of 43.2 seconds and can track the target. The result is that many missiles eventually fly around in space chasing a ship but are outpaced by their target. At some point, however, they can catch each target and eliminate it when the target slows down, makes a turn, or heads straight for an attack. On average, 613 missiles were used to destroy all targets, which makes heavy guided missiles a risky choice to use against S-M ships, since you might run out of missiles. The light guided missile counterpart performs somewhat comparable with the heavy guided missile in high attention mode. On average, 625 of the 680 missiles were used, and in one case they managed to destroy the last target with the last missile. For me, it is difficult to say why they performed equally. The light missiles deal around 20% of the damage of the heavy counterpart, but are 5 times faster, with a speed of 877 meters per second. Although their turning rate is 7 times higher and their strafing rate 5 times higher. Overall, the accuracy of the light guided missile must be 5 times higher on average across all target types than that of the heavy guided missile. This is because the same number of shots are needed to destroy all targets with 5 times less damage. Thus, 5 times less damage cancels out 5 times higher accuracy. Also, the light missile has a 5 times higher strafing rate in addition to the 5 times higher speed. So it could be that these 2 characteristics are the main contributors to the accuracy of missiles. At this point, a good missile against fighters seems to have the right balance between speed, strafing rate, and damage per missile. I tried to demonstrate my idea in this illustration. The arrows to the right represent missile velocities, and the arrows pointing downwards representing their strafing rates. When we have a look at the yellow arrows, we see if the strafing rate is high enough, the missile can strafe into its target. While, when we have a look at the red arrows, we see that the strafing rate is too low and the missile misses its target. With the heavy and light guided missiles, we have 2 extreme counterparts so far, where one seems to have a high accuracy and the other one balances out the missing accuracy versus higher damage. But let's continue our test. The next missile on the list is the Heatseeker. With the Heatseeker, we have the fastest tested missile so far. Here, both variants performed around the same, with 596 missiles used on average until all targets were destroyed for the heavy variant, and 588 missiles used for the light variant. Their performance was slightly better than that of the guided missiles. This could be a random fluctuation or due to the increased missile speed. The light Heatseeker is 4.5 times faster than its heavy counterpart, and the scrambling rate is 6 times higher. Again, the damage is only 20% of the damage of heavy missiles. This finding supports the theory that accuracy is determined by the speed and scrambling rate of a missile, because we have the same overall performance of both missiles again. Another factor that might contribute to the same performance is the flight time. As we can see, the heavy missiles must chase the target for a long time, until they get a chance to land a hit. So the 5 times increased damage of a heavy variant might not be the only reason for the similar performance. With the heavy and light smart missiles, we again have two missiles with around the same ratios between damage stat, fly speed and strafing rate, but overall lower velocities. With velocities of 170 meters per second and 782 meters per second for the heavy and light missiles respectively, we have the slowest missiles in this category. While the heavy smart missile performs comparable with the other heavy tracking missiles tested so far, the light smart missile this time outperforms its heavy counterpart, with only 435 missiles used on average to destroy all targets. This missile also shows the most consistent performance so far. Why the light smart missile performs better than the light guided missile is hard for me to say. Both have comparable ratios of velocities to strafing rate and velocity to turning rate. The light smart missile is even slower than the guided missile. It could also be possible that a slow missile velocity that is still fast enough to intercept its target is advantageous for missiles, so they can track their target better because they have more time to react to the movements of their target, so they can better fine-tune their movements. So in case that every of the 3 light tracking missiles we had so far is maneuverable enough, the key characteristic of a fast enough missile for precision is a low velocity that is still fast enough to catch up to its targets. The next missile type on the list is the swarm missile. I call it the tracking missile's counterpart of the scatter missile from the Dumbfire category, because they are also fired as a spread out load, but this time with a tracking function. When we look at the performance of the light swarm missile, we see that it struggles more than the other light missiles to finish off its targets, which leads to a higher missile usage on average. In one of the 3 tries, 3 PEs and 3 Ms were left, while in the other 2 tries, 24 and 26 missiles were left after all targets were destroyed. This is likely due to the reverse ratio between fly speed and turning rate, which makes the missile less reactive to movement changes of its targets. The heavy swarm missile scores the best so far, with 354 missiles used on average. This peak performance made me curious, so I looked at the ratios between velocity and swerving rates as well as turning rates for the first time for heavy missiles. While the light swarm missile can score well with the same shooting pattern, there could be more to the heavy swarm missiles. Overall, with ratios of 60, it has the best ratios between velocity and swerving rate, as well as velocity and turning rate of all heavy missiles, except the heavy Starburst missile, to which we come later. But the ratios between velocity and turning rate is still worse than that of most light missiles so far, while still better than that of its light counterpart. But the ratio between velocity and turning rate is still worse than that of the light missiles, while still better than that of its light counterpart. Despite its low velocity, this could be the reason why the heavy swarm missile can hit its targets the best when they slow down or make sharp turns, because that's the moment when the missile is faster than its target and can exploit its agility advantage over the other heavy missiles. So far, with the heavy cluster missile and heavy swarm missile, we have 2 missile types with a more spread out shooting pattern that take their first place in their respective categories so far. Now we have only 3 missile types left. The light Disruptor missile has a very low turning rate of 4 degrees per second and a fly speed of 964 meters per second. According to this, it is now predictable that the light Disruptor missile should perform worse. In one test, the missile performed comparable to others, but in the other 2 tests, it performed much worse. In one test, 2 PEs were left, and in the last test, 1 PE. The light Interceptor missile is the speed king. In the test, we see that the missile is mostly zipping around without hitting any target. Due to this, in none of my tries could the light Interceptor missile destroy all targets. From this extreme case, we can say that speed is not the most important characteristic that determines the accuracy of a missile. I even would say it supports the theory that a low ratio between fly speed and turning rate, as well as a low ratio between fly speed and strafing rate, is extremely important, because of extremely high fly speed of 4,630 meters per second. The Interceptor missile has bad stats in these 2 characteristics and therefore delivers bad results. The last missile in high attention mode we need to cover is the heavy Starburst missile. The Starburst somehow did manage to destroy all targets in any of my tests. Of all heavy missiles, the heavy Starburst missile is the most maneuverable. Accordingly, they should perform better than the heavy Swarm missile, but they did worse than all other heavy missiles and could destroy all of the targets in any try. There was always 1 PE left in the end, and once also an M. Currently it looks like randomness determines which heavy missile performs the best. The only advantage I can imagine at this point that stands out is that heavy Swarm missiles have a spread out shooting pattern, which makes it more difficult for S to M ships to dodge all missiles while taking a turn or trying to fly past them. Another reason to think of is the higher reload time for the Starburst missile, compared to smart missiles or other better performing missiles, except the Swarm missile, which has an even higher reload time. So it could be possible that the fire rate of the Starburst is too slow and S to M ships have too much time to recover their shields between hits, which makes the Starburst missile less lethal despite its better maneuverability. With the high attention mode covered, I'll now speak comprehensively about the low attention mode. Here all light missiles did a bad job, with mostly 1 to 3 PEs left in the first try. The light Swarm missile was at the bottom of the performance, which destroyed nothing after all missiles were fired. The light Interceptor managed to take down 1 M. Knowing the heavy missiles results for low attention already, I decided to abandon all light missile tests after the first one. The heavy missiles performed the best in low attention mode, except the heavy Swarm missile. The heavy Swarm missile left over 3 PEs, 3 Bs and 3 Ms, after all missiles were fired. The heavy guided, Starburst and heavy Heatseeker could destroy all targets, with around 230 missiles left. The heavy Smart was slightly weaker and used 307 missiles on average. With every missile covered, I'd like to conclude which missile performed best overall for every mode, high and low attention, and overall for both modes. In high attention mode, the clear winner is the heavy Scatter missile, with only an average of 605 missiles fired. Even the heavy Swarm missile used less missiles in average, with 354. I ranked the heavy Scatter missile higher because it only depleted 1/3 of its total missiles, and the heavy Swarm missile used around 50%. After this, I rank as an alternative the light Smart missile, with an average of 434 missiles fired until all targets were destroyed. The performance in low attention modes was overall very sobering. Here only the heavy tracking missile could destroy their targets, except for the heavy Swarm missile. Overall I would rank the heavy guided, Heatseeker and Starburst missile equally, and the heavy Smart missile a bit below them. For an overall performance in high and low attention mode, we can only suggest the heavy tracking missiles again, because these were the only ones that could fight their targets effectively in both modes. Because the heavy Starburst missile could destroy all targets in any of the high attention mode tests, we are left with 3 candidates for the best spot against small to medium ships. Here again I would rank the heavy Smart missile slightly below the guided and Heatseeker, because of its slightly worse performance in high attention mode. This leaves the heavy guided and Heatseeker missiles as the best anti-small and medium ship missiles. Despite the slightly less performance of the heavy Smart missile after the testing, it became my clear favorite. In case you watched my video about the missile performance against destroyers, the heavy Smart missile performed best there overall. If my missile destroyer test results aren't outdated due to the new fly model, we can conclude that the heavy Smart missile is the only missile used by missile turrets that can fight every enemy in every mode effectively. Therefore, if I go for missile destroyers in the future, I will use heavy Smart missiles on them. Finally, I like to quickly summarize what I think are good characteristics for a good missile in high attention mode, in case more missiles are added to the game in the future, so we can estimate their performance. The most effective missiles in high attention mode were the heavy Swarm missile and Scatter missile. Despite the slow velocity of the heavy Swarm missile, it can still fight small to medium ships effectively. It is likely that the heavy Swarm and heavy Scatter missiles take advantage of their spread out shooting pattern, which makes it for them more likely to catch targets that are trying to fly past them or taking a turn. Since the heavy Starburst missile has better maneuverability than the heavy Swarm missile, it is likely that for heavy tracking missiles a high maneuverability is not a key characteristic for a high performance, and therefore the shooting pattern sets the heavy Swarm missile apart from other heavy tracking missiles. We could now say that for this reason the light Swarm missile should also perform better than other light missiles, but this wasn't the case. The difference between light and heavy missiles is that light missiles are fast enough to catch up to their targets, and don't have to wait for their targets to make a mistake, like a bad turn. Here, the light Smart missile, guided and Heatseeker performs better than others, possible due to their better turning and strafing rates compared to their velocity. It is likely that the slow speed, which is still above the target speed, becomes the most important characteristic of a missile, because the missile is less likely to fly past its target, because it has the largest time window to adjust to its target's movement changes. Therefore, I think in case of future missile releases, we should look out for missiles against S to medium ships that are slow but still faster than their target ships, while having velocities to strafing rates as well as velocity to turning rates ratios like the light-guided, Heatseeker and smart missile to provide good enough maneuverability. My conclusions about missiles might be a bit speculative, but overall it's an interesting topic. Maybe you've realized some points I missed, or know more about missiles than me and how their precision is characterized, and would like to share it in the comments, so my missile science can improve in the future. With this, I'm at the end. If this video was helpful for you, consider to like and subscribe, and most of all, have a nice day.